Hello and welcome back. For those who are following along, we are taking a look at an in-development, classless co-op ARPG dungeon crawler called Purgatorio. We have a bit of a different video today. For those following along who are game developers, maybe this one will be more interesting to you, but we're going to be going over a viewer comment, actually, on one of my last videos, asking about how a particular game feature worked, as they were interested in doing something similar. So the feature in question that they're asking about is how I go about doing this, changing the level. And there's some context to this, because this game is also, as I mentioned before, co-op. And so how do you do this kind of level loading and level swapping seamlessly, all within a co-op game? Well, to go over this, actually, we're going to go into the editor. For those interested in game dev, this might be a little bit interesting for you. So if you're at all interested in game dev, stick around. But this, in order to go over this, we're actually going to go out of the source of Purgatorio, which you can see here. I'm going to close this because I have another project which I have been maintaining for a little while now, that is called Godot Multiplayer Base. And this is a project which I made for a Discord a while back, just to kind of help users and devs understand how to build a co-op game in Godot. And so this project has all that we need to understand how the level hot loading works. So first, let's take a look at the viewer's question. They asked just a little question, just one little question, because I myself developed something. Is the Sanctuary room, and Sanctuary is one of the levels that we were looking at in Purgatorio, is the Sanctuary room always in the map, or is it a different scene that you switch to? And so a little bit of context here. If you haven't used Godot, scenes are essentially the base levels, you can think of them, but they're the base objects that you can load, and you can swap the entirety of the engine to a particular scene. And this is what you do when you launch the game. You have to launch into a particular scene within Godot, and my architecture here is no different, but it gets a little bit different when we look at levels. So this little project is a really good example because it actually splits out. I'm not sure how easy that is to read, but hopefully it comes through on YouTube. But we essentially have the root of the game here. And so we can see that we have a levels folder. So let's start at the top here. One root game scene. So to answer this user's question, Purgatorio, as well as this example, does hot loading. And that means that the game loads one scene always, one time, and it never actually loads another scene again. We instead hot load the levels at runtime into a levels node here at the top level. And you can see that here on the left-hand side. And then every entity in the world, such as the players, the enemies, and any other entity that exists within the world, is in a completely different node. So the levels themselves are loaded outside of the entities. So that's point 2 and 3 here. We have a levels container and we have an entities container. And that gives us something that looks like this. I'll pop this up. You can see two clients side by side. The one on the left, I'm going to say host game. And one on the right, I want to say join game. Boop. And we can see player 2 joined player 1, and they both are being updated. So that's just an example of what's going on here. Both clients have the player entities within this entities bucket, and that's because this multiplayer spawner is set up. You can see this here. Let me expand this. It is set up to have the player entity as the entity in its auto spawn list, and the bucket that it is dropping into is this entities node, which, if we're all following along, is this entities node right here. So the entities themselves are separate from the levels, and the levels are hot-loaded. This game is a particularly good example because it just shows you an example of what might be in here. You might have a scene that you load in the background on all clients, and you can just drop that scene into this levels node. And you haven't actually changed scene in the engine. This route is always maintained within the engine. So this is what I mean by hot loading, because you're never actually changing the scene as far as Godot is concerned. You're just dropping the level into the levels node. And then every entity in the world goes in the entities node. Okay, but that doesn't give us exactly how all of that comes together and works. And that's where we have to talk about layers. So I wanted to use an example from World of Warcraft, which really well illustrates how this works. So I'm going to let this play out. And what I want you to notice is that this player is in one layer in World of Warcraft, and then they're going to join a different person's group, and their character is going to be swapped to another layer, and you're going to see other entities pop in. So I want you to watch how that happens. There you go, they join the group, and then boom, you see all of these other entities load in. We'll look at that one more time. They join somebody's group, and then all the other entities load in. So what's happening here is the user is swapping from layer 1 to layer 2, or whatever it is. You know, we don't know in World of Warcraft terms what those things might actually be called, but effectively we are looking at layers. And layers is the key here. If you have levels that are hot-loaded, let's say these layers were 1, 2, and 3, so long as there was no layering, every person who was on a different level would be able to see each other. And that's just because there's no layering. But because there's layering, the people on layer 1 see everybody who's on layer 1, and layer 2 sees everybody who's on layer 2, etc., just like what happens in World of Warcraft. This Godot Multiplayer Base project provides a very basic example of what that layering might look like. And I know for those of you who aren't game devs or aren't programmers, maybe this is a little bit scary, but if you're looking at making games, you should get used to writing code. You know, sometimes you just have to do it. And in this case, the examples here give us a 4-layer system that allows us to effectively have, in a multiplayer game, 4 different levels loaded at any given time in that multiplayer session. So, if you're interested in how this works, I'm not going to go into it any deeper than that, because it is honestly maybe a lot to get your head around if you haven't done something like this before. But the way that works is what allows us to do something like this, where you have one player, they host a game, the other player joins a game, and what happens when that second player joins the game is they join the same layer as that first entity, and thus both entities show up. So both entities are on the same layer, and thus they see each other. And this is what allows you to have multiple different levels loaded in a multiplayer game. There are other ways to perform something like this. Hot loading is just one way. This is a really, really solid infrastructure if you are running a small indie video game project and are just looking to have something that works. This is going to work for so many different use cases. So if you're interested in that, I'm going to leave this down in the in the description of this video. I'll leave a link to the Godot Multiplayer Base. Give me a star if you do end up downloading this or viewing it, because I think that this is a good resource. This is a project that I'm maintaining. I'm keeping up to date as Godot updates. I'm making sure that this base is good enough for people to start to draw a base from. So appreciate your support there. And if you found this interesting, I know it's a little bit different in terms of a devlog. We're kind of going a little bit more into the technology of how all of this works. So hopefully that wasn't a big deviation for some of you. But this is effectively how games work, you know. So if if you appreciated this, go ahead, leave a like, subscribe for more updates on the Purgatorio project. I've got a lot of cool stuff coming in future videos to show you guys, so really looking forward to that. So subscribe if you've been following along and are enjoying the video updates on the project. And if you have interest in other type technology videos like this, which can help you develop in your games, go ahead and leave that in the comments down below, and I'll look at showing some examples of how I have accomplished some of those particularly multiplayer elements in Purgatorio. So thank you for watching.